Hello guys, Fish767 here, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at a commander deck, and that commander deck is taking turns in Boros. Now I only have the important cards here, the ones that are important for a combo. I will link the entire deck list in the description, and I will also link a video to some actual gameplay, but I just want to go over the combo in this video. So our commander is Zerta the Dawnwaker. She has a companion ability that we don't particularly care about, but she costs 1 red, white, and so that means that our mana base can be very flexible, which is useful in the deck, although most of our cards are artifacts anyway, so the actual color of lands in our deck doesn't matter. But she says, abilities you activate that aren't mana abilities cost 2 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the mana cost to less than 1 mana, and that's what we care about. So some of the important creatures in the deck are Drow Scorpion, which will let us untap an artifact whenever an artifact creature is put into a graveyard. We also have Felidar Sovereign and Hellkite Tyrant, which are just alternate win conditions. Soul of New Phyrexia, thanks to Zerta, only costs 3 mana, can give our permanents indestructible until the end of turn. We can activate that every turn practically because this deck generates an absolutely insane amount of mana. Now we also have Workhorse, which combos with the Drow Scorpion, and Cauldron of Souls. So Cauldron of Souls, we can tap it to give Workhorse Persist. Workhorse says that it comes into play with 4 +1/+1 counters on it, and then we can remove a +1/+1 counter from it to add 1 colorless mana to our mana pool, and we can do that as a mana source, which means that it can't be responded to. And so then what we do is we essentially tap the Cauldron of Souls to give the Workhorse Persist, which means that when it dies, it'll come back into play with a -1/-1 counter on it. Then we remove all 4 counters from Workhorse, generating 4 colorless mana, but it also kills it. Because it kills it, Drow Scorpion will trigger, untapping the Cauldron of Souls, and then Workhorse will trigger the Persist ability and come back, but this time it'll come back with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. Then we can tap Cauldron of Souls to give it Persist again, remove the 3 +1/+1 counters, generate 3 colorless mana, and then we do this an infinite number of times, which generates infinite colorless mana. So that's one of our combos. We also run Myr Battlesphere, which says when it ETBs, it'll create 4 Myr, which goes infinite with Nim Deathmantle and Ashnod's Altar. So we can sacrifice Myr Battlesphere to Ashnod's Altar to add 2 colorless mana to our mana pool. Deathmantle will trigger, which lets us return that Myr Battlesphere to the battlefield if we pay 4, but thanks to Zerta, that will only cost... Actually, no, that still costs 4, doesn't it? Yep, that still costs 4. So we're going to have to pay 4 to bring it back, but thankfully Myr Battlesphere makes Myrs that we can all sacrifice for mana, so this still generates infinite mana, despite the fact that it's 4 instead of 2 like I thought it was. It still works out. Then we have Beacon of Destruction, which is basically our win con if we take infinite turns. Because like I said, this is a taking turns deck, so let's go over how we do that. Now the actual cards that we're going to be using are either Magistrate's Scepter or Ugin's Nexus. Either one of these will let us take infinite turns. Magistrate's Scepter says tap it, remove 3 charge counters from it, and take an extra turn after this one. Its first ability just puts a charge counter on it, but we're not going to use that very often. Then we have Ugin's Nexus. It says if we put into a graveyard from the battlefield, instead exile it, take an extra turn after this one. We do have to be careful though, because if as we're starting that extra turn, we do have an Ugin's Nexus on the battlefield, then we'll actually skip that turn. So you want to make sure that you don't have any of these on the battlefield as you go from one turn to the next. So how we're going to do this with Magistrate's Scepter is we're actually going to have to get at least 3 charge counters on it every turn. Now, we have Contagion Class, which says pay 2 proliferate thanks to Zerta's ability, and I'm just going to tell you the actual Zerta cost of the cards, not the regular activated cost of the cards, but thanks to Zerta, it's down to 2 mana, so we pay 2, tap it, proliferate. Then we have Energy Chamber, which says at the beginning of our upkeep, choose 1, and one of those is put a charge counter on target non-creature artifact. So at the beginning of our upkeep, we can put a charge counter on Magistrate's Scepter, then we can proliferate it using Contagion Clasp or Karn's Bastion, which I actually don't have here, but it's in the deck. Karn's Bastion basically does the same thing as Contagion Clasp, so it's pay 2, put a charge counter on Magistrate's Scepter, but it's a land, so that'll actually cost you 3 mana effectively because we can't tap it for mana after that. Then we have Power Conduit, which we can use to remove a counter from a permanent we control, which can either be a Workhorse or a Gemstone Array, or some other card that incidentally has a counter on it. And if we do, we put a charge counter on target artifact, which could be our Magistrate's Scepter. Another thing to note is that if we're going infinite to get infinite mana and we're putting artifact creatures into the graveyard, then Drow Scorpion can untap Contagion Clasp, which we can then use to proliferate an infinite number of times. Which means that we can actually just do Magistrate's Scepter an infinite number of times, because after we're done untapping the Contagion Clasp, we can now untap the Magistrate's Scepter to go take an infinite amount of turns. Now, if we have infinite artifacts, which we can generate off of the Myr Battlesphere and Nim Deathmantle combo, we can use Clock of Omens to tap 2 untapped artifacts. We control an untapped target artifact, which in this case can either be a Contagion Clasp to proliferate an infinite number of times, or it can be Magistrate's Scepter. Now, we also have Empowered Auto Generator, which says when it enters the battlefield tapped, then we can tap it to put a charge counter on it, and then add X mana of any one color where X is the number of charge counters on it. So then we can untap this using Clock of Omens to generate an absolutely insane amount of mana. And this mana will persist through turns because the number of charge counters will continue to increase. We also run Gemstone Array, which thanks to Zerta only costs 1 mana, so we basically pay 1 mana to put a charge counter on it, and then we can remove one of those charge counters to add a mana of any color to our mana pool. So not only does this mana fix for us, but it lets us store an infinite amount of mana as far as we need to between turns, but it also produces an infinite amount of charge counters if we have infinite mana, which means that we can then move it using Power Conduit to put an infinite number of counters on the Magistrate Scepter to take an infinite number of turns. Then we have Prototype Portal, which is imprint. When it ETBs, we may exile an artifact card from our hand. Then, if we do, we can pay X and tap it, create a token that's a copy of the exiled card, where X is the converted mana cost of that card. So this is where Ugin's Nexus comes into play, where if we imprint Ugin's Nexus on a Prototype Portal, then we can pay 5 and tap Prototype Portal to make a copy of Ugin's Nexus, but thanks to Zerta, that's only 3. And then we can sacrifice the Ugin's Nexus to Trading Post or something else that lets us sacrifice an artifact, which will then exile it and let us take an extra turn. So then we go to the extra turn, which automatically untaps the Prototype Portal, pay 3, make a copy of it, and then sacrifice it again, rinse and repeat, and we take infinite extra turns. And then at that point, we use Beacon of Destruction to win the game, because that deals 5 damage to a creature or player and then shuffles it back into our library, which means that we can't actually lose by drawing ourselves out unless we're really unlucky. So just don't get unlucky and you'll be fine. Then we have Mirrorworks, which if we have infinite mana and we're also playing an infinite number of artifacts, especially if we're doing the Ugin's Nexus combo. Actually, it doesn't work for that because Ugin's Nexus would be a token copy. But basically, this lets us pay 2 to make a copy of an artifact when it enters the battlefield as long as that artifact is not a token. And if we do, then we create a token that's a copy of that artifact. So basically, it lets us double up on a lot of our triggers, which is really great for everything. And I think I've gone over like every single card in here except for Moonsilver Key. So the reason why Moonsilver Key is in here is because you can actually search at Gemstone Array, because Gemstone Array has a mana ability. It's that second ability. Remove a charge counter, add a mana to your mana pool. So we can use Moonsilver Key to search for that. Then we also have Braid of Fire. So let's go over how Strionic Resonator works with the rest of the deck. Strionic Resonator says pay 2, tap it, copy target triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. And Braids of Fire's cumulative upkeep just so happens to be a triggered ability. And so the cumulative upkeep cost of Braids of Fire is to add red to your mana pool. So basically, on turn the first turn after you have this out during your upkeep, you'll add 1 red. The second turn, you'll add 2 red. The third turn, you'll add 3 red. Well, Strionic Resonator can actually speed that up. So you make a copy of it, and so then you'll add 2 and then 3, or 3 and then 4, or whatever number it is, and then the next one plus 1. And you'll add that much mana, and then we can just stick it onto Gemstone Array to keep it until we actually need it. Now, Strionic Resonator can also be used to copy something like where Battle Spheres enter the battlefield triggers. It can be used to copy... I'm trying to see what else it can copy. I think that might be it. It can copy Energy Chamber. And... Nope, that's... Oh, it can copy Blink Mothern. And Blink Mothern will give us a ton of mana. It says at the beginning of each player's pre-combat main phase, if it is untapped, that player adds 1 to his or her mana pool for each artifact he or she controls. And here's the good news. We can tap it using Clock of Omens, so that way our opponents don't get any use out of it. It should also be... Strionic Resonator should also work with Mirrorworks, so that if we have an artifact come into play and then Mirrorworks triggers and we actually want copies of that, then we can use Strionic Resonator to copy the ability off of Mirrorworks to get 2 copies off of the artifact. Which is particularly helpful with an empowered auto-generator or a gemstone array, because if somebody tries to destroy one of our gemstone arrays, we can actually just move all the counters onto a different one. And so it gives us protection in that sense, where they have to board wipe our gemstone arrays to actually get rid of them. Now, the bad part about this deck is that if you make infinite mana, but you have nowhere to put the infinite mana, then you might still lose, because we don't run that many mana sinks in the deck. So I did have one game where I made 1,000 mana, and I couldn't use it, and I sat there for about 15 turns just drawing lands. Luckily, my opponent was in the same boat as me, and we were both drawing lands. So finally, I did draw something to use the mana on, but that can happen where you make thousands of mana, but you cannot use it. So that's just a fair warning. But this deck's really fun to play. Nobody expects it, because you're literally taking turns in Boros, which is supposed to be the 2 worst colors in the game, but I really do like this deck. And so that's kind of how the entire thing works. Nim Deathmantle was really there more to protect Zerta as opposed to combo with Ashnod's Altar, but just it does. It just does. And also something else to note is that if you have Ashnod's Altar down along with the Workhorse combo, you can just sacrifice Workhorse instead of removing the last counter from it to produce 2 mana instead of 1. And then Mirror Retriever will get us back an artifact, and it combos with a bunch of the things here. Like it might not look like it does, but it really does. You'll find a bunch of weird combos as you're playing through the game that I didn't even know about. And that's how I found some of these combos. So I hope that you like the deck. If you do, I will link the deck list in the description. I will just warn you, though, that the deck is $200, which is a bit expensive, but it's a good deck. As far as competitive play, I would not play this in CEDH. It's not worth it. And your playgroup will probably hate you if you buy it. So take the price with a grain of salt, and know that if you buy it, you might not use it very often. But thank you for watching, and I hope that you guys all have fun. Goodbye.